He hadn't left his room in 3 days. His law partner stood outside the door with his hand raised, not knocking yet. Because the last time he'd knocked, no one answered. Word had gotten around Springfield by then that Lincoln's friends had gone through his room and quietly removed every razor, every knife, anything a desperate man might use against himself. Nobody said the word out loud. They just did it. And then they took turns making sure he was never alone. This was the man history would later put on currency, carve into a mountain, call the greatest president the country ever had. Right now, he was 29 years old, lying on a cot in the back of a general store because he had nowhere else to sleep. And he'd just broken off his engagement to marry Todd. Not because he didn't love her, but because he didn't trust himself to make anyone happy, including her. His law career was going nowhere. His closest friend had recently watched him write a letter so bleak that he burned it rather than let anyone else read it. Lincoln himself put it plainly, in a letter that did survive. He was the most miserable man living. If what he felt were equally distributed to the whole human family, he wrote, there would not be one cheerful face on earth. He wasn't performing sadness. He wasn't having a bad week. Something in him had broken, and everyone around him could see it. And nobody, including Lincoln, knew what to do about a mind that simply refused to work the way it used to. Here's the part that gets left out of the paintings and the coins. Lincoln didn't fix this by deciding to be strong. He didn't wake up one morning and choose greatness. For weeks, he could barely function. He missed sessions of the state legislature, something unheard of for a man that ambitious. His friends started calling it the fatal first, January of 1841, like it was a wound that needed a name. What actually happened was smaller and stranger than a breakthrough. He kept going to the office, not because he felt better, because his partner needed him there, and some stubborn piece of him didn't want to let one more person down, even in the state he was in. He started reading again, not self-help. There was no such thing yet. He read poetry about death and despair, over and over, like he was trying to find someone who understood exactly where he was. And slowly, without ever announcing it to anyone, he started doing something almost nobody talks about when they talk about Lincoln. He began treating his depression the way he'd later treat a losing war. Not as something to defeat in one battle, as something to survive, one bad day at a time, for the rest of his life. Because that's the part nobody tells you about people who seem unbreakable. They didn't stop breaking. They just learned how to keep functioning while broken. And something about that, something about the specific shape of what he did next, is the reason his name is still spoken today. He kept doing the small, stubborn thing, showing up, reading, not talking about it. Because in 1841, there wasn't language for what was happening to him, and the men around him didn't know whether to call it weakness, sickness, or just bad character. Then it got worse. That spring, rumors started moving through Springfield that Lincoln had lost his mind entirely. Not melancholy. Insane. His law partner started sleeping in the same room some nights, not saying why, just staying close. Lincoln stopped attending church. He stopped visiting friends. A man who used to be known for telling stories on the courthouse steps, the kind of stories that drew a crowd, went quiet for weeks at a time. People who'd known him for years started crossing the street rather than ask how he was doing, because nobody had the first idea what to say to a man who looked like he might be disappearing. Here's the consequence nobody expects. It wasn't the depression itself that almost finished him. It was the isolation he built around it. He'd convinced himself that whatever was broken in him was his alone to carry, that showing the full weight of it would confirm what he already suspected, that he was fundamentally unfit, unlovable, built wrong somehow. So he pulled inward, and the more he pulled inward, the worse it got. That's the trap, not the sadness itself. The conviction that the sadness has to be hidden to be survivable. The turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no single morning where he stood up and decided to be different. It was a letter from a friend, Joshua Speed, who'd gone through something similar and had the nerve to say it plainly, that Lincoln wasn't uniquely broken, that this thing had a shape, and that shape had a bottom to it, and men had climbed out of that bottom before. What changed wasn't the depression lifting. It didn't lift. What changed was Lincoln deciding to stop treating it as a secret shame and start treating it as a fact he had to build a life around. He started writing his despair down instead of just drowning in it, putting words to the specific edges of what he felt instead of letting it stay this shapeless, terrifying fog. He returned to the legislature before he felt ready, because he'd learned waiting to feel ready was its own kind of trap. He let speed keep checking on him, and instead of resenting the intrusion, he let himself need it. It wasn't recovery. It was something smaller and more useful. He learned the difference between a bad day and a bad life. And he started making decisions based on that difference, showing up to the office on days he wanted to disappear, because he'd learned that motion, even fake motion, kept the worst of it from swallowing him whole. He was still going to carry this for the rest of his life. He knew that now. The question wasn't whether the darkness would return, it was what he'd do the next time it did. It returned in the White House, worse than anyone in Springfield could have imagined. By 1862, his son Willie was dead. The war was going badly, and Lincoln was carrying more grief and pressure than most men would survive with their sanity intact. There were nights his staff heard him pacing the halls alone at 2 a.m. His wife feared for him. Some mornings he could barely make himself dress. The old darkness hadn't gone anywhere. It had just gotten a bigger stage. This is where the old Lincoln would have disappeared into it, pulled inward, gone quiet for weeks. Let the shame of feeling this way while the country needed him convince him to hide it entirely. Instead, something different happened. He kept a small, worn scrap of paper in his desk, something he'd apparently carried for years, with a line on it about how this too shall pass, not as a cure, but as a fact to hold on to when the fact of his own mind felt like it was lying to him. He still wrote out his darkest thoughts instead of just absorbing them. He still let a handful of people see the real weight he was carrying. His secretary, his oldest friends, instead of performing strength for everyone all the time. And he still had bad days. There's an account from a White House aide describing Lincoln coming out of his office looking like a man who'd aged 10 years overnight, saying almost nothing, sitting alone for an hour before he could face the next meeting. That never stopped happening, right up until the end. But here's what was different. A bad day didn't spiral into a bad month anymore. He'd built just enough structure. The writing, the honesty with a few trusted people, the refusal to disappear entirely, that the worst days became something he moved through instead of something that swallowed him. He wasn't fixed, he just stopped believing that fixed was the goal. Historians would later find some of what he wrote during those White House years private, unsent, never meant for anyone. Not speeches, not statesmanship, just a man being honest on paper about how much he was struggling, because he'd learned decades earlier that the honesty was what kept him upright. He led the country through its worst war while carrying a weight most people never knew was there, because he never let anyone see the full shape of it. Not out of strength, out of habit. A habit built back in that room above the general store when a 29-year-old man with nothing left decided that surviving today was enough and that tomorrow could ask for something different. That's the part the monuments don't show. Not a man without darkness, a man who built a life around carrying it anyway. One day, one letter, one difficult morning at a time. He never told most people what he was living with. He just kept showing up until the day he didn't have to hide it from himself anymore.